Hello and welcome back to session number 2 in this mini course. And so today is all about secret number 2, which is the very thing that keeps most people from ever trying yoga. And that is this idea that I am too inflexible to start the practice. Now, they're really saying something else than what they're actually saying. Like there's something deeper going on, and I'm going to address that in the next session, the next training video. So definitely be on the lookout for that one tomorrow. But for right now, I really want to address like how do you actually get flexible? What is flexibility? That's why the secret is what we call, how stretching will not make you more flexible. It sounds crazy, I understand, especially as a yoga teacher. I'm very self-aware as to how that might sound. Because this is where people enter. Like, I want to get more flexible. And so I think yoga is the way to do it. But yoga is first and foremost about strength, not flexibility. Like, it's the biggest misunderstanding in all of yoga, I believe. Well, maybe that it's more physical than it is mental, because it actually started as a mental practice like we talked about in yesterday's training session. So how does that work? You may be thinking right now, like, that doesn't even make any sense. And it won't make sense if you don't understand the anatomy. And I'm not going to go too deep into it because this isn't an anatomy session. This is like a mini course where I'm trying to give you some highlights and understanding into some of the misconceptions and misbeliefs that people have about yoga. And so that when you get into it, if you haven't already, you can like view it from the right point and get the right result, the right benefit that you're actually looking for. And so understanding it anatomically is, there is a methodology that we use called myofascial methodology. Myofascia is the soft tissue of the body, right? So if you think of the bones, the tissue that connects the bones together is fascia, right? It's sometimes it's muscle, sometimes it's what surrounds the muscle, sometimes it's the muscles that link into the tendons that connect to bones. And so this fascia, there are lines that are connected to each other. There's a front line, there's a back line, there's side lines, there's spiral lines, and then there's a deep front line. Now, the point of them is they're continuous lines, so that like a muscle isn't separate. It actually connects through this fascia to other muscles and other connective tissue. And what's really important is this idea that flexibility comes from stretching is a misnomer. Now, and the reason I know this is that over like 20 plus years of me teaching and looking at people coming in who are trying to get more and more flexible, what we found over those years is that what helps them more so than stretching is actually strengthening, which doesn't make sense, but it makes sense if you look at it myofascially. And this is what I mean. The very deepest line is the deep front line. The deep front line is responsible for like the integrity of how you stand. And if it's weak, what actually has to happen is the other lines tighten to do the work that the deep front line is not doing. There is a saying that we use, it's called weakness precedes tightness. And so this is what I mean, like people can come in and stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch all day, every day, and like years later they're still like, man, I'm still tight. And it's because they're not addressing the core problem, which is the weakness in the deep front line. This methodology, this sequence of events that happens in a yoga class, like why one pose goes where, the next pose goes the next, and the third pose goes here, is how we organize every single class. And we are very specific in the way that we're teaching because we want to emphasize strengthening, integration, stabilization, like getting actively strong in the areas that are weak. Because if you don't do that, you can stretch and stretch and stretch, and what's going to happen is those other lines are just going to tighten back up. And maybe the best example to give is there was a student of ours who had low back pain, and debilitating. Like he's a friend of ours, and he's an avid surfer. Like he actually even has a house like in Central America that he goes to and practices and surfs like real close to the coastline. And like he was like on the verge of having to give it up. Like his passion is the one thing that he loves, he lives for in life. He was having to give it up because of this low back pain. Well, he came in and he started practicing, and like he started getting a little bit of benefit, just because yoga and the way we approach it, it starts getting mobility and it starts getting core strength. Within a month, he was like, man, I don't wake up in pain anymore, right? I don't wake up, the tightness that was leading to the pain in my low back, I don't wake up with it anymore. And what I told him, I was like, man, you've been consistent, and it's that consistency, but more specifically, what you've done for your core to strengthen that deep front line, it's letting the low back and the muscles that are associated with the more superficial lines relax, because now your core is actually doing the work that it's supposed to do. And it's like, so now he's like surfing all the time. Like we just saw him like this past summer, like down in Hatters, because we love surfing too. And man, he's on fire because, man, he got his passion back. He has his health back. This is the value of understanding like what's the real practice, the work that we're doing, strengthening first before you get flexible. Don't get me wrong, we're gonna get you flexible. Part of it is stretching, but to get that tightness relieved, you gotta address the strength. So this is the one thing, like if you don't see anything else, and like this is the last time you're ever gonna see me talk, I wanna give this to you because it's really, really important. There's an epidemic in our society, and this is what's called a lower cross syndrome. Now, what this means is there is chronic tightness and chronic weakness within this lower portion of the body. And so the weakness is in the core, the low belly, and the weakness is here in the glutes. The tightness then happens in the low back, and it happens in the hip flexors. So that's why it's the cross. There's weak and weak, tight and tight. And it's because everyone's sitting down all the time, which means the core is spilling out, which means the flexors here are chronically short, and it creates weakness here. And when all that's happening, this low back is in this slightly flexed position, and it tightens because the core is not engaged, right? So when you stand, we have this very dramatic, called an anterior tilt. It's a forward tilt of the pelvis. It puts more pressure on the low back because of the weakness here. You can't engage to support it. There's tightness here, which is pulling down on the hips, which is increasing the pressure on the low back. And it creates this recipe for pain and literally disaster for the low back. And so what we teach, there's a principle of lengthening the tailbone down and pulling the pelvis to a neutral position. And in that process, what you're doing is you're pulling the low belly in. So what's happening is you're strengthening here so that you can lengthen and release the tension here and here. This was what was actually happening through a consistent practice for our friend, that he was then not just like experiencing it in the 60-minute, 75-minute class he was taking, but it started wiring him differently so that when he was walking around, when he was sitting, when he was running, when he was doing whatever he was doing off the mat, he was embodying this strength and length. And over time, that consistency, literally it's repatterning the body. So this idea of the lower cross syndrome can be alleviated by lengthening the tailbone down, pulling the low belly in so that you're strengthening the core, you're strengthening the lower portion of the back body, and you're lengthening the low back, and you're lengthening the hip flexors. You're literally reversing years of misalignment and bad posture. This is what I mean by weakness precedes tightness. And that is just one element that we teach that can get you out of that pain that you're experiencing, which really is what people are like wanting when they're saying, man, I'm so tight, I'm inflexible. What that's going to lead to is tension, tightness, and pain. And no one wants to live in pain, right? And so this is what's so valuable about the process and what we teach. And really, I can't vouch for any other yoga studios because I don't know what they do, but I know the methodology that we teach is specifically designed to get your body strong first so that you can be rid of the physical aches and pains that you're experiencing, primarily which are from a lack of movement and a lack of strength. After all that, yeah, we're going to be stretching and getting the body more fluid, more mobile, and more open, but you got to do the pre-work, which is the strengthening and the engagement, the stabilization first. And that's the core of what we teach in every single pose in every single class. And so I really hope this helps. The next video is going to be on why does it take so long for people to like figure out how to do the poses? Right? There's a reason for it that, like, if you look in any other field, any other like industry that people are learning something, like they do it in a very specific way that leads to very specific results. And for some reason in yoga, it's totally backwards. And so if you've practiced before and you've been in classes and you felt confused, there's a reason. And this very next video is we're going to teach why and how you don't have to deal with that. How, like, we've created a solution that we want to offer in this next video that you'll be able to learn and apply. And so thank you so much for this, for watching, for being here, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks so much.